Welcome to the Signpost Inn podcast, everyone. This is Brandon Booth. I'm your host. I have with me today one of my regular co-hosts, Matt Boland, and a special guest, Joe Rigney. We're excited to talk to you both. Hi, Matt. Hi, Joe.
Hey, Brandon. So before we get going, I have to tell a funny story about how this interview took place. And Joe already knows this, but I first heard you talking about the book that we're going to talk about today on the Pints with Jack podcast, another one of my favorite things that I listen to. And I'm telling my wife, I'm like, I really wonder if we could get this author on Signpost Inn. And she says, well, who's the author? Tell me. And as I say, well, it's Joe Rigney. And before I can even really finish kind of laying out your credentials and who you are, she interrupts me and says, Matt, Joe, we know Joe. And she walks over to the Christmas cards we have over on our table because it was Christmas time and pulls out y'all's family Christmas card and says, Jenny was my roommate in college, silly. Give him a call. And so that was kind of a funny moment. But for those people who don't have a personal connection with you, Joe, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, great. I'm currently a fellow of theology at New St. Andrews College in Moscow, Idaho. And I'm also a minister at Christ Church here. Before that, we spent about 18 years in Minnesota, my wife and I. I was a student and then a professor and then president at Bethlehem College and Seminary there in Minneapolis. So John Piper and that whole crew. And so I had great years there. And then I've been here in Moscow for about a year. Before that, though, I was born and raised in Midland, which I think is where you are, right?
Yep, that's where we're
at.
I
was born and raised in Midland, Texas. First 18 years of my life there. And then was Texas A&M and then Minnesota and now Moscow. So lots of M's, Midland to Minnesota to Moscow.
Wow. Growing up in Midland, that's a connection I did not know you all had. That's amazing. Joe, so we're here to talk today, listeners, about Joe's book, Live Like a Narnian, Christian Discipleship in the Lewis Chronicles. And I have to say, Joe, this struck me right off the bat, as Matt was the one that sent the book to me and he says, you got to read it. It struck me because first, I have a complicated relationship with the word discipleship.
Okay.
And second, as I opened the book, you immediately start connecting with Abolition of Man, which is another of Lewis's writings, which is one of my favorite things. So it was the whole thing was complicated for me. I was like, where is this guy coming from? What's going on? Loved it. Can you tell us what discipleship is? What do you mean by that in that title?
Yeah, good. So, in that book, so I wrote that book now by 2012, 2013. I've written about 7 or 8 books. That one was by far the most fun because I wrote it over about 6 weeks. We were doing a conference in Minnesota in the fall of 2013 for the, 50th anniversary, is that right, of Lewis's death. So it's 50th anniversary of Lewis's death. Desiring God was doing a big national conference on Lewis. They asked me to speak on Narnia. I taught some classes at Bethlehem on this for lay people and stuff like that. And I was like, oh, sure. And I had in my head that someday I'd like to write a little book on Narnia. Just add a lot of stuff that I kind of taught this. They'd asked me in February to speak at the conference in September. I thought, now's the moment. Now is the time. Let's do this book. And so I literally just plowed through it. I would have my students come over to my house. I would write 2 or 3 chapters based on each book. I'd go through, it was working them out, write a draft, have them come over, and then I would just read the chapters out loud to them. And then kind of see, did it all make sense? Was there anything that they noticed or that was unclear? And then I would go back and edit. So I did this for probably every 2 weeks for 6 to 8 weeks or something like that. It was wild. But it was the most fun in writing a book because it just kind of came and it was the deadline and all that stuff. So that's fun. So thinking about discipleship though, I was connecting the dots between Lewis's vision of education and abolition of man and what we typically mean by discipleship. For Lewis, education is about sort of the formation of the human person. It's what now I would probably use the word, I'm active in the classical Christian education movement. And so the Greek word paideia, which is a big word in that movement, it shows up in a number of places, but Ephesians 6, parents, bring your children up in the discipline and paideia of the Lord. And
just define paideia.
Yeah. So paideia is basically kind of like whole life enculturation. It's the way that a people passes on its sort of values, the knowledge, values, wisdom, customs, from one generation to another. And so it's a big word that Paul uses there. I would probably connect it now. I didn't do this in the book, but I would connect it to kind of like that Deuteronomy 6 vision of, When you get up in the morning, when you wake up, when you walk by the way, teach these statutes to your kids all day, every day, formal context, informal context, put it on the doorpost. Basically, it's this kind of, all of life immersive experience of formation, forming both the body and the soul, the mind and the heart. It's total enculturation. So that's what I mean by discipleship, education, paideia. These are all that same basic idea.
Right. Well, and so kind of riffing on that, right, is this idea because you in the dedication you dedicated to your boys.
Yeah.
And I love basically you're taking this big idea, this paideia discipleship, these big lofty ideas and saying, well, maybe we should just talk about it in a fun way, in an easy to approach way, and going to the Chronicles of Narnia as a source of this is how look, maybe you need some Narnian air, right?
Right.
And I love that. And as a lot of people know who listen to this podcast, I need a metaphor to wrap my brain around a concept. Like I need that. And for me, the Chronicles are so perfect for that. So for you in using the Chronicles of Narnia and using it as an idea for discipleship, I guess I kind of want to ask, well, how did that first occur to you?
Yeah. So I think, I read the books as a kid. I don't remember the first time. I don't have a distinct memory, but I know my mom probably must have read them to me. And another thing is when I was in high school, a senior year public school literature class, I kind of wrote my big paper on some of the Christian symbolism in Narnia. So at least at that point, I had already, I had made some connections and was like, when Aslan turns into a lamb in Voyage of the Dawn Treader at the end, that's like lion, lamb, Christ stuff, right? So I was picking up what Lewis was putting down basically, even in high school. And then I went to college. I know I had a copy because I would periodically pull them off the shelf to not study, it was whatever I was supposed to be doing. It was this was the diversion, was hey, let's go read these. And so that was kind of the early formation. When I was at Bethlehem, I think probably 2008, Michael Ward's book, Planet Narnia, came out, which was sort of this deep dive on sort of the medieval cosmology that sort of lurks in the background of Narnia, that Lewis had kind of embedded this sort of not just the Christian symbolism, but sort of this medieval cosmology thing, and that the books could be sort of parsed out. And I just remember reading that book and just going, this is amazing. I was sold. I was all in. And so it was that book that kind of launched me more into hey, there's more that you could do in Narnia than just read and enjoy it. And so that kind of coming out of that was when I started teaching classes on kind of Live Like a Narnia and exploring Aslan country. What are sort of the Christian and sort of these other elements of the books. And so that's where it started. And I did that for a couple of years before then it was let's put this on paper. I also had read, Doug Wilson has a book called What I Learned in Narnia. And at some point in there, I'd read that, which is his series of lectures. So I organized my book more by the Chronicles themselves. It kind of works through book one. There's some that bridge books, but by and large, it's book by book. And he had organized his by topic, like Confession of Sin, and had kind of pulled from all over. So it was more topical. But it was in the same kind of vein that I was wanting to write a book that was just, I love this, this stuff. I love what this book has done to me. I think, realizing that a number of things had kind of clicked, by virtue of the time I spent in Narnia had actually clicked. By the time I was writing it, I had I had two sons. So I had, they're young. So 2013, my oldest would have been 4 and my middle son would have been 2. I now have a third boy, but I had 2 sons at the time, and it was sort of all right, we're about to enter the Narnia years. And so what are these books doing? And so that's kind of where it came from.
All right, Joe, I'm going to put you on the spot if I can.
Yeah.
Short, simple answer if you can do it for somebody who really wants to know.
Yeah.
What does it mean to live like a Narnian? How do I do it?
Yeah. So yes, live like a Narnian. The phrase, obviously, it comes from the books. It's a variation of a phrase. So Puddleglum says, when they're having the encounter in the silver chair with the witch, and puts his foot in the fire and kind of gives his declarative speech, says, I'm going to live as like a Narnian as I can, even if there's no Narnia. Right. And so that's where the title came from that. And the idea is that there's a certain kind of characteristics and custom, like Narnia. You could be a citizen of Narnia. That's an identity. And I think it's Lewis's way of saying this is what Christian is. Okay. There's sort of a core here of Christianity as a sort of identity. And living like an Narnian means you breathe Narnian air. It gets into your bones. It gets deep into you. And it shapes your imagination. It shapes your actions. It shapes your loves and your hates. And so that was the idea with that. Living like a Narnian was you soak yourself in the books and you think you're just having a fun time in a fantasy story, not realizing that maybe not realizing when you're a kid, you probably don't realize, you think you're just reading books. But the whole point of these was to kind of shape and mold you so that you could live more faithfully in the real world. They're not escapist fantasy. It's go on an adventure and come back and live more faithfully.
Mm. I love that. Yeah. And I think that's the answer, I think, Brandon, to the original question of discipleship. And also with the fear, because for people who have kind of grown up in American church, sometimes there's this idea that discipleship, or what it looks like to be a Christian, is this very cookie cutter thing that at the end of it, you're all going to look the same and you're all going to have the same giftings and the same strengths. And that's definitely something that I'd never quite connected with and always felt like a failure at. But one of the things I love about this concept of maybe it's just about letting the magic get into your bones and being transformed from the inside. And maybe Puddleglum, who's a pessimist, can be just as much as a hero as Prince Rilian, who wields a sword. Right. So
Puddleglum and Reepicheep are both Narnians.
Exactly.
And so it's not that there's sort of you said a cookie cutter, and even among the sort of the human characters, right? So Eustace and Edmund aren't the same. They both sin grievously, not in the same way. And so you have the great diversity of the kinds of characters that God has made in the story. Lewis writes really good characters. And so you have that. And so you can kind of identify and it's not even identify, I'm all this. It's I'm a little bit of that and a little bit of this. So I have a little Puddleglum in me, but I also really love King Loon of Arkenland. He's probably those are probably two of my top characters.
Well, that was going to be my next question: is who's your favorite?
Yeah, my go-to is Loon. So I think on the back of the cover of the book, I joke that I'm descended from him on my dad's side. So like King Loon, which is a funny thing because he only shows up for like a few chapters in one book, and yet he's left a real, distinct impression on my imagination, and in a kind of aspirational way, right? My sons are now 15, 13, and 5, but there's this sort of aspirational, what is manhood, what is kingship, that Loon really articulates well, and it kind of is something that I aspire to be. And so he's influenced me that way. And so for a long time, I would say, I think I say this in the book, that my favorite book is probably Horse and His Boy for that reason. Now, 11 years later, I would say Silver Chair has a different kind of appeal to me because of the scene with Puddleglum in the witch's cave. There's probably another project that will come out of that, focused just on kind of that interaction and the dark enchantment she seeks to put them under, and that whole scene there's a lot there. I think it's one of the more profound analyses, I guess, depictions of the problem of modernity. Like, what is it like to live in the modern world? She's giving sort of classic modernist arguments, but there's also something in the air that gets in your blood and makes it really plausible and puts you to sleep. And so it's like, what's Lewis doing there? And I think there's a lot of really cool stuff. So that's a future project. There's a chapter on that in the book, but it's kind of an expanded, I've got more thoughts on that one. So Horse's Boy and Silver Chair are probably the two.
I mean, that's where my mind is still kind of stuck on this. It's hard to live like a Narnian. I'm not sure I would know what would it mean to breathe Narnian air. And, I think what you were talking about is letting the stories, kind of living in the stories or reading the books. And there's something more going on there, but I guess less on a practical level and more on maybe it's theoretical. Do you have some sense of like, what things are you wanting me to breathe? What shift do you want me to have?
Yeah. So maybe one way, back out for a second and think about friendship. Okay. So your family is a given. God just gives you a family. You don't get to choose that, but you do get to choose your friends, and you need to choose wisely. Bad company corrupts good character. Presumably good company strengthens good character. And so your friends really matter, who you choose to be your friends. Books, movies, music, entertainment, those are friends. That's the bucket most people should have. The books you choose to read, the music you choose to listen to, the shows you choose to watch. These are your friends, and they often can leave that kind of impact on you as much as your actual real life friends. But at least when it comes to books, for example, you're inside their head. in a way that you can't get inside an actual friend. That you can have a conversation with a friend, but when you get to sort of see the inner workings of someone as they wrestle through something in a book, there's a kind of deep fellowship that happens there. And so you need to choose your friends well. Why? Because your friends shape your loves, your friends shape your hates, your friends shape your life. Bad company corrupts good character. So if you choose bad friends, if you read bad books, if you read the wrong kind of books, Eustace read the wrong kind of books and was ill-equipped to deal with dragons. And so reading the right kind of books is about having the right sort of friends so that when you face temptations, trials, when you face all the hardships of life, who's there with you? And so I would say, like, again, I'll use Loon as an example. This is what it means to be a king, to be first in every desperate attack, to be last in every desperate retreat. And when there's hunger in the land, as must be now and again in bad years, to wear finer clothes and laugh louder to scantier meal than any man in your land. So he describes kingship. He describes what I would call, this is just a description of headship, godly masculinity. And it's, the first in, last out piece is one element, right? Are you bearing burdens on behalf of those under your care? Are you bearing it first and are you bearing it longest? But then it's that second part where, okay, there's hunger in the land. There's hardship. What happens when things get hard? And it's, do you wear finer clothes and laugh louder, right? Do you actually rise to that occasion with joy? And it's like that image, that's breathing Narnian air. It's like, I have that image. And so when things get hard for me in life, am I responding to it with grumpiness? Am I no fun when things get heavy? And do I sink into it? Or do I laugh louder to ski into your meal and say, isn't it great? I was built for this. And so it's that's breathing Narnian air. So you can do the same thing with courage. You can see courage in Prince Caspian. You can see wisdom. You can see the need for forgiveness, all of these sort of things, character qualities, as well as kind of like deep structures of reality, deep magic, deeper magic, the moral law that condemns us and the gospel that redeems us. All of these things are woven into the story, and soaking yourself in them trains your mind to run in certain kinds of biblical ruts. And Lewis thought that stories like this in particular were useful because they bypass our Sunday school associations. So, so it's a way of kind of, he's stealing past the watchful dragons. What did he say? Obligation freezes feelings, which I think is true. Rejoice in this, right? Love this. And it's like that command directly can often make, it's not necessary. I want to obey it, but I just don't know. And so what the story does is it pulls you in, and now you're not thinking about loving what's lovely, but the story, by depicting what's lovely, enables you, right? It sort of primes the pump. And then having had the love awakened there in Narnia, you come back here and you go, okay, now the world looks different. Now I feel different. Now my heart's ready to do what God wants it to do.
Yeah. Well, and I love that because on a certain sense, there's this sort of line within Christianity where you're supposed to put away childish things. And sometimes, fairy tales or children's stories gets kind of lumped into that. Well, those are childish things. And I love how Lewis flips that on its head and says, actually, it's pretending to be a grown-up that is actually one of the greatest follies you can do. I don't know.
That's the sin of Susan.
Right.
So when people talk about Susan's fall from grace, so to speak, and they think, oh, it's because she's being feminine, right? She's interested in lipstick and stuff like that. And that's not how Lewis depicts her. It's that she wants to be seen as very grown up and sort of patronizes the childhood journeys in Narnia. Oh yeah, when we used to imagine that stuff. And it's that patronizing thing that is actually the mark of someone who's insecure in their maturity. So Lewis did think, at one point he said, a children's story that's only good for children is not a good children's story. If it only grabs you, if it only has value when you're a kid, it's actually not probably a really good story. It's the stories that you can get more out of as you age, that as you get older, Aslan gets bigger. That's the kind of story that's actually worth telling. And that's what you want to give to your kids. That's what you want for yourself. So it isn't I grow old and don't need this anymore. It's like, no, as I grow, I actually feel, see depths in this that I missed when I was 12.
Yeah. That kind of makes me want to ask the question that I'm sort of jumping ahead here, Matt, but in chapter 6, I'm just going to read what you say. You say that For this is also what it means to live like a Narnian. It means to greet the world the way that you would greet a retired star. To resolve to see the world the way the Lewis scholar Clyde Kilby did. And he has these wonderful resolutions. I'm not going to read them all, but essentially they are wonder.
Yeah, right.
And I think that's kind of what that childlike thing is. My question, though, Joe, is this. I would be really curious to hear how you engage that. Like, how do you do those resolutions? How do those impact you? Where do you find the wonder?
So, I mean, like sometimes I do stare at stuff. Look, that's with myself. Like, so one of Kilby's resolutions is I resolve to stare at a tree and just like, not to like get lost in the like, oh, what is it? You know, just be glad that it is. Like, there it is in all of its treeness. Stare at a cloud. Stare, you know, like, in other words, like, don't miss, you know, what's right in front of your face. Seeing the obvious. Lewis says at one point in Letters to Malcolm, you know, the chief challenge is to come awake, like we're sleeping, and it's to come awake, even more so to stay awake, remain awake. Like that's the chief challenge, is to be awake to reality. I think that that's part of what the value of romance, fairy tale, fiction, fantasy, whatever you want to call it, is in kind of awakening wonder, awakening possibilities, and then to realize like you live in a fairy tale. Okay. So we think fairy tales are this other thing, this, oh, it's fiction. It's like, no, you live in one. Right? You live in a world full of, you know, that has dragons. You live in a world that has giants. Like that's history. But we go, oh no, history is this and fairy tales that. No, you live in a fairy tale. You live in a world that, plants, right? There's these green things that grab sunlight and air and nutrients from the soil and then mix it all together in some crazy process and eventually produce flowers. They take water and turn it into nectar, which then bees take, so like little bees come to get it and they taste it, digest it, spit it back up, flap their wings really fast, and it turns into honey, which you eat. Like you eat glorified bee vomit. That's just the craziest thing in the world. It's just amazing. And God's like, yeah, eat honey because it's good. Like the Bible tells you, like, and go eat that. And why? Because that's what wisdom's like. Know that wisdom is such to your soul. Eat honey because it's good. Know that wisdom is such to you. Taste and see that the Lord is good, right? The word of God is sweeter than honey. All of these things are like wake up. And so fiction, by introducing us to kind of these fantasy stories, by kind of taking something that's like, I guess, enchanting the world or defamiliarizing, right? We get so bored because we think, well, yeah, it's just a bee. It's just a tree. And it's like, good grief, what is it though? Like, do you realize what you're saying? Like there's a big ball of flaming gas in the sky that is why anything it is able to live. And it just is there. It's like literally a big ball of flaming gas. And then Lewis comes along and he goes, well, it's not just a ball of flaming gas. Don't do that. Don't be like, oh, it's just chemicals. No, there's probably an angel like flying it. Why would you think that? Well, the Bible says that. The Bible is the host of heaven. What is the host of heaven in the scriptures? Right? And you go, well, the host of heaven is the stars. Oh, is it? So when it says the host of heaven here, oh no, that's angels. Well, what over here? Is it angels? Is it stars? Is it angels? Is it stars? It's like, I think it's probably both. So you live in a world where angelic intelligences guide, big balls of flaming gas through the sky in a perfect dance that allows you to breathe, that allows you to live. Like that's crazy. You live in that world. So wake up. So that's part of the value is in awakening that wonder. And so that's how it kind of functions is like I will sometime, and it's not just, I would say it's not just like, oh, appreciate nature. The other week I coach the high school JV football team at my kid's high school. So I'm out there. It's a Friday. I guess it was a varsity game. So it was a Friday night. It's like 7:00, sun's going down. They're singing the national anthem. Like we're in this, like there's mountains in the background. It's just this, great classic Americana moment. And I'm just like, I can't believe that I get to live this. Like I am alive. Right. And it's just like, are you awake to that? And then do you say thank you? Right. So Chesterton said that gratitude is happiness doubled by wonder. So it's like, are you amazed? And do you say thank you? And then does that gratitude, this is Lewis is going to say, gratitude is basically the on-ramp to adoration, to worship. You can't honor God on the highest moments, the deepest moments for your salvation, all these kind of things, if you've not learned to honor him and give thanks to him in the little things, in the small things. beginning where you are with the little stuff. That's part of what these books do, is they enlarge your heart so that you can do that.
Mm.
Yeah, I love that. So, I mean, I guess I kind of want to put in a brief parenthetical here, because I imagine maybe there might be up to about half of our listeners that maybe have never read the Chronicles of Narnia, or it's been a long time. And so one of the things we want to do is just push all those people, say, go read them. And don't read them because, it's supposed to be Christian or something. Like, just read them to enjoy and let the magic work on you. But then also, I love how there's so many things that you can draw out of them. And you mentioned A Horse and His Boy. It's definitely my favorite Narnian chronicle. And I love the story of Shasta, right? Because he's an orphan. He's living in very much a relatable situation. Life is hard. It's kind of brutal, and there's not much hope in the world. And then he hears that there's a land called Narnia, and there's the possibility that he could escape from where he's at and get to where he's going. I can't help but think of like what Signpost Inn is kind of set out to do for the longest time, which is to be a respite for the weary traveler. And I guess, so the question that I'm asking for you, Joe, is what does the story of Shasta have to say? What encouragement and what admonition does it have for the weary Christian traveler or weary sojourner on this journey?
Yeah, good. So, Shasta does then kind of set off with Bree on this sort of Narnia in the North journey, right? I'm getting out of here. And I'm going, and this is actually, it is a theme that shows up in a number of different ways. Puddleglums, we're going to live like Narnians. We're going to go look for Narnia, even if there's no Narnia. We're going. We're not staying here. Whatever we're doing is we're not staying here. That kind of like adventure quest sort of idea. But as you follow his journey, like everything goes wrong, like constantly. Like it's constantly frustration. They get separated when they're going through the big city, and he gets pulled in, and then like he's confused, like he's got you find out he's a twin. He doesn't know that, but he gets confused for his brother. He's just getting yanked around, right? Like, so on one hand, he's journeying. On the other hand, other things are just yanking him around, and everything's hard. Everything's scary. Everything, traveling across a desert, barely making it. There's a whole chapter on this in the book about whenever they're trying to go warn the Archenlanders that, hey, there's an invasion coming. The Colormans are coming. They're going to invade. And so they race through. They get chased by the lions. He almost dies. He gets there, and then immediately he thinks, "Oh, we made it. We made it." And he tells the hermit, "We made it. There's the army. Colorman's coming." And then he's like, "King Loon's that way. You go." And he's like, "Are you kidding me right now? Like, what?" And that's how we feel sometimes, right? Like, it's like, I was just faithful. Against all odds, I did it. I stuck with it. And then you finish it and you get done. And then it's like, guess what your reward is? Something harder, right? Get back to work. And that's the line that Lewis made. Shasta had not yet learned that the reward for completing one task was to be given another harder and a better one. That's your reward. Congratulations. You get a promotion. It's now harder. And so that's part of the message. But even within that, so he learns that lesson. And then he meets Aslan, right? Mm-hmm. He's walking on the mountainside with something next to him that's breathing heavily, that might be a monster, might devour him. And then, Aslan says, "Tell me your sorrows," right? Tell me your sorrows. And for the first time, little orphan boy gets to kind of unload like all the unfairness, all of the hardship, how painful everything has been. And he just kind of like dumps it. And Aslan is like, "I know, right? I know." And he's like, but then he's also like, "But you need to know, like, I was behind all of that, right? I was the lion. I was the cat. I chased you. I was, behind all of these hard things. That was me. Why? To get you to here." And so like there, you got providence. You've got the need for fortitude, grit, digging deep in order to do hard things. You've got the need to unload the emotional baggage and just the pain of it all. But like, the thing that Lewis does is he doesn't indulge it. He doesn't let Shasta feel sorry for himself, right? It's not like he's like, yes, things are hard. Things are hard all over. But God is good and he has purposes. So trust him, right? You just know that. And so like, it's like, work that into your bones, that even your hardship is not vain. It's not fruitless. Don't throw a pity party. Don't feel sorry for yourself. It's okay to hurt. It's okay to weep. It's okay to, grieve, but but don't throw a pity party.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, we could go off this and go for another hour on the attributes of Aslan and how it reflects some of the beautiful things of our Lord, right? But I do love that picture of Aslan, the providential nature of him guiding Shasta's entire life, even from the point when he was a baby in a boat that could have drowned at sea. But he's also he's got this perfect balance of power in the body of a lion, and yet he's gentle and merciful, right? And his mane is warm and it smells nice for those people who draw close. I love that imagery.
Right. Yeah. And it's a terror to those who don't. Right. So like, the classic moment, this is why you should always, so if you've not read them, so if your audience hasn't read them, and they go buy, a 7-volume set, the American versions, HarperCollins, is terrible. They're the worst. And what they've done is they've rearranged the books. And they think that Lewis, it's a complicated thing, but don't read them in the order that they give them, right? They want you to read a prequel before watching it. It would be like trying to watch the Star Wars movies and starting with the Phantom Menace. It's like, don't do that. You got to start with Luke Skywalker, and then you do that trilogy, then you go back, and then you can get the backstory. That's how Narnia is meant to be read. So start with Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Don't start with Magician's Nephew. Whatever you do, don't start with Magician's Nephew. And the reason is in Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, there's a scene where, the beaver leans into the kids and is like, Aslan's on the move. And it's just like this like magic moment of like, no, none of you know who Aslan is. Right. But neither did the kids. And it's like, but when Peter heard it, he felt this strong and courageous. When Lucy felt like it was the first day of summer, Susan felt like it was a smell of cookies coming by. But Edmund, who's a rotten stinker, right? Edmund has a feeling of horror wash over him. So his react is like, it's the same name. But how the kind of person you are dictates how you respond in that moment, right? Are you the right kind of character or the wrong kind? Are you digging in? Are you wallowing in your sin, or are you open to the grace of God? That's the sort of, what kind of soil is this? And Edmund is rotten soil at that moment, and so he responds negatively and bolts and goes over, and it gets worse for him, right? He almost gets executed by a witch because of it. But God's gracious. Aslan's gracious. He saves him anyway. So it's not without, but it does matter. The kind of person you are sort of on this side of the wardrobe dictates what happens to you on the other side of the wardrobe.
Right. And I can't help but think of Eustace's transformation. And I love in the Dawn Treader, the whole art, his character arc, and him, his internal becoming his external. He's a dragon internally in the real world. And in the Narnia, what he is internally comes out, and it takes Aslan undressing him, unmaking that dragon hide, and baptizing him essentially into a new way of being,
ripping him apart, just tearing him apart. That's what has to be done.
Such great imagery. I just love it.
Yeah. Joe, thanks again.
Yeah.
For being willing to talk to us about all of this and kind of just fire hose us. I love it. You got one shot. I'm sitting here going, all right, Dr. Rigney, tell me what's the one thing I do next? How do I'm interested.
Yeah.
I'm a little lost.
Sure,
what do I do, man?
I'd say go pick up the books and read them just as literature. Don't get hung up. I would not go buy my book, and then if you've already read them, then go buy my book, and it's like it would be like having a long conversation about like, oh, isn't that cool spot? Like you'd know it'd be fun. If you've never read Narnia, don't go read my stuff. Just go read it and enjoy it for what it is. Like enjoy it as a story, enjoy it as a thing, and then I do think there's probably a value as you complete a book to be a little self-reflective, right? Just ask yourself, like, what moved me there? What did I like? What tasted good? So I just had a snack. I just ate it. It's a snack. It's a meal. I just had that. What did I like best? And maybe just make a little, you could even, if you really wanted to do this, if you're like, all right, I'll try a little bit more than just reading a book. Read the book and then take a few notes about things you liked, things you didn't like. and then go read the other books, right? Just work your way through. And then after that, reflect on what happened? Like, what happened to me? What sticks? Like, what is sort of embedded? So, even some of the things we've talked about, right? I've mentioned Loon sticks, Puddleglum sticks, Shasta, you said, man, sticks, right? So these different characters stick, these moments stick. So you should read through it and go, what sticks? What resonates? And then think about why. And then after having done that, if you're still curious at that point, if you're like, okay, that was interesting. Those books were fun. That was interesting. Some things stuck. Now you can go read my book and see what happens. Like, see if you go, oh, it's like dots get connected and you go, oh, that's what was going. That's how I'd approach it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So people watching and listening, the answer is don't buy the book. Go buy Narnia.
Unless you're already a fan of Narnia, in which case, absolutely go buy the book.
Yeah. I think, yeah, absolutely. I think our recommendation is probably buy both. If you haven't read Narnia, definitely buy Narnia and read it. Okay, Joe, I got to ask you. I know your time is short, but I think I know your answer. Should I watch the movies?
No. Here's what I would say. You should read the books and really internalize it. And then I do think there's some value in comparing and contrasting. Like, this is the way you can sometimes you can learn by imitation, and then you can learn by like not imitation, right? Like this is what not to do. So there is some really interesting things to compare, sort of what Lewis does, and then these adaptations, and what modern filmmakers feel like they had to change. Like, what did they add? What did they do? I think that there is actually some things to be learned about it. And you actually, and what Lewis does actually, I think, shines a little brighter when you realize. So, two things that kind of jump out from the movies that I think are just appallingly bad. Is in the first one, or actually, I think they're both in the second. Actually, in the second one, Peter, there's an opening scene where they're in like a subway station or something like that, and somebody kind of bumps into Peter, and he gets real cranky, and just is kind of like, ugh, and he's really upset because, he doesn't like being a kid. He lived a whole life as a king in Narnia, grew up, grew old, and then had to come back, and now he's a teenager again, and now he's kind of cranky that he's a teenager again. He doesn't get to be the boss. He doesn't get to be a king anymore, and it's like. And I remember reading an article by the filmmaker. That scene's not in the books. That's an added scene. And why was it there? Because the filmmaker said, I've always thought it was interesting that he got to be a king and then he had to come back and be a kid again, and how hard that must have been for him. And it's like, you do not understand these books at all. Like, zero understanding of like, oh, because that means king's about bossing other people around. I don't get to boss other people around. But that's not what kingship is in Narnia. It's dying. Right? It's dying first. It's laughing loudest. So you go be a king for a while, and then you come back, and it's like, now Peter's going to be a really great older brother. He's going to be a great teenager. He's going to be a dutiful son. He's not going to be a cranky little punk, who just wants to pick fights all the time. So that's one. And then the same thing happens later in that story in the books, when Peter shows up to put Caspian in his rightful place. And it's like, Caspian is supposed to become king. And Peter shows up, and now you got a king and a prince, and it's like, oh, what's going to happen here? And the first thing out of Peter's mouth is, hey, we didn't come to take your place. We came to put you in it. Like, I'm not a threat. I'm not a rival. I'm not a whatever. The first thing that happens in the movies is sort of this like alpha male, like, sizing each other up, preening, getting cranky at each other. And it's just it's the entire spirit of the stories is fundamentally altered. And it's because modern stupid filmmakers can't imagine like actual biblical hierarchy, actual biblical honor. Like, those are just foreign concepts. And there's all kinds of stuff. I did read an article because I know that there's another set of films being made. I think Netflix is making a series of the books. And they may reboot the whole thing. I assume they're going to reboot the whole thing and do all seven. But I read an article that was basically like, well, here's what they're going to have to fix. And I'm just like, stop, just shoot me now. Like, don't do it. Because, and the thing that they want to fix is, like, does the magic make sense? Like, does the lore, we want the detailed, like, how does the magical world work? And it's like, that's not this. I mean, like the magic works, but if you want to understand how the magic works, go read the Bible. Like like, how does deep magic work? And it's like, well, how does the moral law work? How does deeper magic work? I don't know. How does sacrifice work? Like, that's how it works. And if you're going to try to fix it by making it sort of, if you're going to Harry Potter it up or whatever, it's just going to be dumb. So yeah, no, I'm not.
It's the opposite of breathing Narnia air, right? Like
right.
What's happening is you have people who've never breathed Narnian air,
Correct.
sort of bringing modernist scientific air into Narnia and just suffocating.
Yeah, it's, right. It's like pumping a bunch of like, exhaust, fumes from a, big coal-fired power plant or whatever is just pumping, smoke and fog and and it's like, here, breathe this, isn't it great? But it's this is what happens a lot. Like, here's a really great thing that has an integrity of its own. It's really good, and then it's like progressives and other worldly people want to like wear like a skin suit. We're going to hollow it out and we're going to call it Narnia, but the entire spirit of the thing, the entire substance of the thing, is fundamentally altered, and it will fail. Like, people won't like it because it won't be that. So no, I'm not a huge fan. I mean, I guess the only redeeming quality of those kind of movies, I would say the same thing about like Lord of the Rings kind of stuff, is they do awaken interest in people to go read the original, and I have hopes that if people see the movie and then read the original, that the original is going to pop in a way that the movies don't.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thanks for taking time with us today.
Yeah,
we really
Thanks,
appreciate it. Listeners, again, the book is Live Like a Narnian, Christian Discipleship and Lewis's Chronicles. And thanks for hanging out with us. We appreciate your time. May the grace of Christ go with you wherever the road takes you.
Thanks.
Amen.
Thanks for listening. This podcast is a production of Signpost Inn Ministries, a nonprofit Christian ministry dedicated to strengthening people's relationship with Jesus and walking with them compassionately on their life's journey. We offer spiritual direction, retreats, and lots of other resources like this podcast. Please visit us at signpostinn.org to learn more. We especially want to thank our generous donors who support our work and keep this podcast going. If you've benefited from something you've heard, please consider supporting us by making a tax-deductible gift at signpostinn.org/donate. We also want to thank Rex Daugherty for creating the original theme music for this podcast. You can check out more of his work at his website, and you can find all the links in our show notes.